This country was built on slavery, which means slaves built this country. The slaves in America have earned reparations for their suffering.
And continue to earn reparations every moment we spend submerged in the systemic prejudice, racism, and white supremacy.
God damn, that was racist.
Why are you white? Oh my God, Karen, you can't just ask people why they're white.
What's up, guys? It's your boy, Benny. Disney is the worst company in America because, quite frankly, no company has fallen further from the vision of its founders. The once proud American company and its founders are spinning in their graves. Walt Disney famously said he hated communists.
And I feel that they really ought to be smoked out and shown up for what they are, so that all the good free causes in this country, all the liberalisms that really are American, can go out without this taint of communism. That's my sincere feelings on it.
And now his entire company is filled with them. And what is the new drivel that they have vomited onto our screens? Well, something called the Proud Family. In a brand new debut episode of this animated series that declares that slaves built America and that America owes Black Americans reparations. Yes, this is the kind of entertainment that Disney is producing for your children. Christopher Rufo here saying that this is pure critical race theory, including the insane conspiracy theory that Lincoln did not free the slaves. We are going to do a public service here. We are going to fact check this little drivel cartoon and all of its insane racist conspiracy theories. This is going to come as a shock to you that the animators at Disney didn't actually go and just do some simple Googling about how America was actually built. But ladies and gentlemen, here we go. I'm probably going to break my finger off pausing this video so many times. We're going to have bloody fingernails by the end of it. Let's begin.
This country was built on slavery, which means slaves built this country.
Okay, first off, fake, false, not true. Slaves did not build America. We're going to try not to pause every 2 seconds here.
Land from sea to sea to sea.
Sea to sea to sea? Which seas are you talking about? At the time of the Civil War, California was not a state. Which sea? The Gulf of Mexico? What exactly are you talking about? Sea to sea to sea. There were not slaves in Oregon, kid.
First it was rice, tobacco, sugarcane.
Sugarcane, you're talking about Jamaican slavery? Are you talking about like the Bahamas? Because that's the Dutch, which, by the way, the Dutch and the English were the ones who founded slavery here in America. These are just relics of a bygone time. Slavery was just a cancerous, antique, leftover remnant of a bygone era of British colonization.
And we were its soldiers, 4 million strong, fighting for America's freedoms, even though we remained America's slaves.
Okay, so 4 million slaves, they are right. That is historically accurate. However, that is a teeny fraction of a percentage of people that actually live in America. That's like less than 1% of the people who lived in America. The idea that 1% of the nation is propping up the entire economy of America is factually and mathematically illiterate.
The descendants of slaves continue to build this.
Slaves built this country. And we, the descendants of slaves in America, have earned reparations for their suffering.
And continue to earn reparations.
Hands up, don't shoot. That also a fraudulent lie.
Every moment we spend submerged in the systemic prejudice, racism, and white supremacy that America was founded with and still has not atoned for.
Slaves built this country.
All right, enough. Enough of the slaves built this country incantation. I know that many of you get your economic analysis news from cartoons at Disney, but let me introduce you to something called Bloomberg. You know, the people who run the stock market. Carl W. Smith, a professor of economics at the University of North Carolina, and also the president for federal policy for the Tax Foundation, writing about how slavery actually hurt the U.S. economy. Slave labor prevented American capitalism from becoming more efficient more quickly. Well, this is interesting. How important was slavery to the rise of the U.S. as an economic power? The reality is that cotton played a relatively small role in the long-term growth of the United States economy. The economics of slavery were detrimental to the rise of U.S. manufacturing and almost certainly toxic to the economy of the South. In short, the U.S. succeeded in spite of slavery, not because of it. In 1860, the eve of the Civil War, cotton production represented just 5% of the U.S. economy. Crucially, and relatively little, just 13% in 1830, was used by the domestic textile industry. That is, American production of domestic textiles. By 1860, domestic use of cotton had increased by only 20% of the total production, and U.S. prices were so inflated that a bale of cotton in New York cost more in real terms than a bale in Liverpool. Far from supporting U.S. industry, cotton cultivation was undermining it. The fact was not lost on northern opponents of slavery. The reason for this was because England and Great Britain were buying so much cotton that they were actually bartering gold for cotton. This was actually harming American industry. Even more telling, after the Civil War and the loss of slave labor, U.S. production rapidly recovered. By 1871, the U.S. had exercised its 1859 levels of cotton exports and was just short of 1860 records despite competition from India. As Stanford economic historian Gavin Wright argues, slavery was a hindrance to U.S. cotton production. Abundant land and limited supply of slaves discouraged the South from investing in infrastructure. Planters would locate on the banks of a river, work the soil until it was depleted, and then move on. This slash and burn economy, dominated by rent-seeking elite, trapped the South in poverty. Just before American independence, the per capita GDP of the South, adjusted for inflation, was $3,000 per year, compared to just $1,800 in New England. Over the next 60 years, Southern per capita GDP actually declined, but the comparable figure in New England increased nearly fivefold. So slavery made the South poorer. It made them less efficient. Slave labor was no match for canals, railroads, steel mills, and shipyards. Slavery and the parochial rent-seeking culture it promoted inhibited the growth of capitalism in the South. It didn't create it. Ultimately, it was Northern industrial might that ended that peculiar institution in the United States once and for all. Slavery was bad for the economy. Sorry, Disney, slaves did not build America.
Field hands, but carpenters, masons.
Blacksmiths, musicians, inventors built cities from...
Those people are not slaves. These musicians are not slaves. So saying that black people have a positive effect on American culture, I agree with you. But why are you saying that those people are slaves? You're showing me famous people and famous inventors who were famous in spite of their skin color. As Martin Luther King would say, because of the content of their character, not because of the color of their skin. So how exactly is this proving your point?
Washington.
40 acres and a mule.
We'll take the 40 acres, keep the mule.
We made your families rich.
From the Southern plantation heirs
To the Northern bankers. To the New England ship owners.
the founding fathers,
Former presidents. Current senators.
The Illuminati.
So, hold on. Like, what the hell are you talking about here? The Northern bankers and the ship owners? From the time of inception in America, from the time of America's founding, slavery was illegal. You're going to have to point to some evidence that slaves created bankers in the North. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, you can pop on over here to Rich Lowry writing in the New York Post, talk a little bit about the economics of the time, this idea that slavery created capitalism in America. Not only were there not enough slaves to ever do that, but also slavery was regressive to capitalism. It held back and created further poverty for the South. The 1619 Project couldn't get any more cartoonish, even as a Disney project. Oh, wait. Slavery has been a fact of human existence throughout recorded history. Why did it suddenly create capitalism just a couple of centuries in a few select places, namely the Netherlands, Britain, American colonies? Why didn't the Egyptians create it? Romans, Vikings? It's true that slavery and cotton production played a role in the American economy, but they weren't determinative. As Phil Magnus of the American Institute for Economic Research points out, a slave-produced cotton and its derivative accounted for 5% of the gross domestic product prior to the Civil War. Are we supposed to believe that absent this sector of the economy, the growing financial and industrial might of the United States would have been evaporated? If slavery was the basis for capitalism, one wonders, why did the capitalist North dare wage a war to destroy the seedbed of its own prosperity? Why didn't the region that was the great source of capitalism win the war based on its superior economic might, rather than getting ground down by a more financially proficient and productive North? Finally, how did American capitalism survive the end of chattel slavery? For the anti-capitalists, the answer to the last question is easy. Slavery, in effect, never went away. That's right. It is the boogeyman that is, in essence, hovering over all of us at all times.
We had Tubman, Turner,
Frederick D.
Didn't they say Lincoln freed the slaves?
What slaves were meant.
and women, and only we can free ourselves.
Oh, really? Only you can free yourselves? Yes, okay. Americans did absolutely nothing to free the slaves. Got it. This is the Emancipation Proclamation. On September 22nd, 1862, President Lincoln issued probably the bravest document this side of America's founding ever issued. The Emancipation Proclamation was declared that as of January 1st, all enslaved peoples in the United States currently engaged in rebellion against the Union shall then be thenceforth and forward freed. This was followed by the 13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime whereas the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to the jurisdiction. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Slavery is illegal in the United States, and this was, of course, fought over in a war called the Civil War, the bloodiest conflict in American history. 2% of the population was killed. 620,000 men lost their lives in the line of duty. Taken as a percentage of today's population, the toll would have risen as high as 6 million souls. This is what the Civil War looks like on a map in comparison to other wars. The casualties were virtually all white people. Strange how I don't see anyone celebrating that. Instead, what you hear is, we freed ourselves.
Emancipation is not freedom.
Why don't you tell a first-generation slave that emancipation was not freedom? Again, Googling is a really powerful thing. Go ahead over here to far right-wing Wikipedia. Where has slavery existed? Where does slavery exist? Let's see. Africa. Slavery existed in Egypt, in Asia, in Europe, in ancient Greece. In the Middle Ages, it existed in Africa, the Americas. Slavery in Mexico can be traced back to the Aztecs. You don't hear anyone going after the Aztecs. Slavery in Canada was practiced by the First Nations and European settlers. India, Japan, Vietnam, and in China, Britain, the Ottoman Empire, Poland, Portugal, Russia, Scandinavia. Early modern period of history. As recently as the 1960s, Saudi Arabia's slave population was estimated at 300,000. There is a fascinating piece of historic evidence to the illiteracy of the woke when it comes to where slaves actually came from, and also how virtually every single nation that has ever existed and every single landmass on Earth that has ever been used slaves. In fact, a world without slaves is a brand new phenomenon. Don Lemon asked a British historian whether reparations would be due for slavery and got fact-checked so hard he has to now have fake teeth in his mouth.
England is facing rising costs of living, a living crisis, austerity budget cuts, and so on. And then you have those who are asking for reparations for colonialism, and they're wondering, $100 billion, $24 billion here and there, $500 million there. Some people want to be paid back, and members of the public are wondering, why are we suffering when you are, you have all of this vast wealth? Those are legitimate concerns.
Well, I think you're right about reparations in terms of if people want it, though, what they need to do is you always need to go back to the beginning of a supply chain. Where was the beginning of the supply chain? That was in Africa. And when across the entire world, when the slavery was taking place, which was the first nation in the world that abolished slavery? The first nation in the world to abolish it. It was started by William Wilberforce, was the British. In Great Britain, they abolished slavery. 2,000 naval men died on the high seas trying to stop slavery. Why? Because the African kings were rounding up their own people. They had them on cages waiting in the beaches. No one was running into Africa to get them. And I think you're totally right. If reparations need to be paid, we need to go right back to the beginning of that supply chain and say who was rounding up their own people and having them handcuffed in cages. Absolutely. That's where they should start. And maybe, I don't know, the descendants of those families where they died in the high seas trying to stop the slavery, that those families should receive something too, I think, at the same time.
It's an interesting discussion.
The historical nutshot that echoed throughout all of history. Don Lemon's absolutely getting owned. Popping over here to Wikipedia once more. In Africa, slavery was so widespread that close to 1/3 of the population was enslaved by Africans. I don't see any Americans in there. Fascinating, ladies and gentlemen. Let's continue to watch this degrading, racist conspiracy theory from Disney.
Private prisons where we become slaves again.
As we celebrate Juneteenth for the umpteenth time.
Juneteenth is a holiday. It's like a federal holiday now. What are you griping about?
It's me. Slaves built this country, and we demand our 40 acres and a mule.
You can keep the mule.
Keep the 40.
We're taking our freedom.
Everyone's cheering for this historically illiterate drivel created by communists at Disney, talking about a practice that was a degenerative holdover practice that nearly 1 million Americans sacrificed their lives in order to end. Not a single kind word about Abraham Lincoln. Conspiracy theories, in fact. Something also shockingly absent in this Marxist fiction that is being pushed by Disney is the existence of actual slavery here. Still, in the year 2023, there's still slavery in a lot of countries that are loved, by the way, and admired by the left, including, but not limited to, communist China, Iran, North Korea. They're talking about a practice that ended nearly 200 years ago. Here in America, a practice that was always seen as controversial, that was never celebrated. And there are countries today that still practice slavery. What is modern slavery from our State Department? Well, modern slavery is trafficking in persons, human trafficking. Modern slavery is used as an umbrella term to refer to both sex trafficking and compelled labor. Weird. The person who is the largest slave trader, seemingly in this country, is Joe Biden, because Joe Biden himself is allowing for human trafficking corridors to exist like a superhighway right here in America, as defined by the Department of State. This is why, ladies and gentlemen, we are extremely happy that Disney is getting slapped by Ron DeSantis here in the state of Florida. DeSantis seizes control of Disney. Reedy Creek Improvement District will force woke firm to repay, talk about reparations, repay $700 million in debt, pay taxes, and be renamed as he wins war against the corporate kingdom of Disney. Very, very good here. Disney gets what it deserves, and so now it looks like Disney will be the one paying reparations to the good people of Florida. So why do we talk about this kind of stuff, and why do we take the time to, Google these things, even though it takes just a few seconds to understand what our actual history is? Well, because our country is made up of a shared history with shared values. And if you don't have shared values, like, for instance, Abraham Lincoln was good and ending slavery was good, and we should respect the people who did it. If you don't understand those things, and if you teach instead this neo-Marxist, racist conspiracy theory garbage, then you're going to poison people's minds. That is the definitive fact check on this viral Disney cartoon. Let me know if this information helped you out, helped you understand a little bit more about what slavery was here in America, and more importantly, what we did as a nation to finally destroy it. We fight for America because America is the greatest country on earth. America did defeat slavery and ended this practice from its very inception. Americans said all men are created equal, therefore laying the cornerstone and the groundwork for the emancipation of all peoples, and for us to be seen as we were created by our Creator, as equal, ladies and gentlemen. If you can't appreciate that, then, got a great place in Uyghur concentration camp for you. And you can see what actual real slavery looks like to this very day. So why don't you find something real to complain about Disney? And until then, stop watching. We're fighting right alongside with you to save America. We love this place, so keep fighting, keep criticizing. My name is Benny Johnson. See ya. Thank you for watching. Our channel is here to meme the libs until they cry, and then to meme them crying. Their tears, they taste just like sweet, delicious ice cream. Salty, too. We ridicule the establishment and the libs because of you. Your support keeps us going. So if you like what you saw, please punch the subscribe button, click like, and ring the little bell so that you know when we're live. Don't you want to know when we're live? And make sure that you subscribe to our email list just in case the plug gets pulled, as tends to happen. If you want to see more of our videos, click here or here. My name is Benny Johnson. Stay free, Base Patriots.